Good morning. Welcome to Leveraging Seller Concessions to Get More Deals. We're seeing a lot more seller concessions in the market right now. It is not aggressively a seller's market in any sense. So sellers are motivated and willing to help with seller concessions, seller credit. So quick overview of what we're going to go over today. Let's look at this. We'll go through definitions real quick. We'll talk about what seller credits are. We'll go briefly over what seller credits can cover, and most importantly, how to incentivize your listing or to get buyers off the fence with seller credits. And we'll also touch briefly on how the recent NAR settlement is impacting seller credit, seller concessions, and how much sellers can give. So let's get right into it. So y'all already know seller credits are a way for sellers to help cover closing costs that the buyer will incur when getting a loan or buying a home. So this is something that I see a lot when I start talking to, especially a first-time home buyer. Buyers aren't aware that there is down payment, of course, associated with getting a home, getting a loan. But they don't know that in addition to down payment, there's also closing costs. So, and as y'all already know, down payment is a deposit of equity into your home, and closing costs are things like lender fees, title fees, recording fees. So there's a bucket of costs that a buyer incurs when getting a loan or even just buying a home. And the punchline is that sellers can help pay some or even all of the buyer closing costs. And just so you know, seller credit, seller concession, these terms are synonymous. They're the exact same thing. Because we are in a buyer's market, less so than a seller's market, it is pretty common to see seller credits or seller concessions, which come out of the proceeds of the seller. It comes out of the seller's proceeds when they sell the home. So another question that I get a lot is, can the buyer finance their closing costs? Well, yes and no. The short answer is technically no, they can't, but we can use seller credits, seller concessions to essentially finance their closing costs. So in order to simplify the answer for buyers, a lot of times I'll say, yes, we can. Here's how. The real answer is you cannot finance closing costs, but we'll get into it really quick. So this would be a circumstance where the seller is perhaps they need to net a particular amount from the sale of their home. They need to net $50,000 from the sale of their home. And so the house is priced in a way where after all of their closing costs, after all of seller closing costs, they're going to net $50,000. So there's not much wiggle room for them. Well, what we can do is we can take, and just to use round numbers, let's say the home is listed for $200,000. Okay, might not be in Austin. Home is listed for $200,000. They're going to net 50. So what we can do is, instead of reducing their proceeds by, let's say, $10,000 for seller credit, instead of reducing their proceeds by $10,000, leaving them with only $40,000 that they're going to receive in proceeds, we can increase the home price from $200,000 to $210,000. And so now the seller is getting $60,000 in proceeds because we just added $10,000 to the purchase price. So they're getting $60,000 in proceeds. And then bam, we give the buyer $10,000 in closing costs. The sellers are back to $50,000 in proceeds, and the buyer is getting $10,000 in seller credits to help cover closing costs. Now, a couple of important notes about this. The home definitely has to appraise for the higher amount. If comps are pointing to the fact that the home is really only probably going to appraise for $200,000, this is not going to work, because the home does need to appraise for $210,000 for the higher home value. Now, another way that I've seen realtors try and set this up where it typically doesn't work is, if you go under contract for $200,000, you'll say, we'll deal with the increase in purchase price and the seller credits later, no problem. Well, unfortunately, probably is going to be a problem. What'll happen is the underwriter and or appraiser will see the initial contract at 200,000 and then the subsequent addendum amendment that increases the home price and adds a seller credit for the same amount. And again, because you're technically not supposed to do that, not allowed to do that, they would probably flag that and say, no, you can't increase the purchase price and then give seller credits commensurate to how much the increase was. So you just got to watch out for that. The way to do it is you start with offering 210 and the closing costs included. Okay, so as long as the initial contract, that's how it's written up, then you'll be in good shape. Another way that I've actually kind of been able to get this done before is we start with, let's say that you went under a contract at 200,000 and you need 10 grand in seller concessions. So what I would recommend that you do, this is a super duper pro tip, it's worked before. What you do is you go, you know what? And this has to be, you have to be very close in negotiation with the seller's agent, and there needs to be mutual trust here in order to do this. But what you would do is you would go ahead and increase the home price, the home value to 210. Okay. And then, maybe we get the home appraised or we get a home inspection a week or two later. Then we are going to add another amendment to the contract, not putting these on the same amendment, put another amendment on the contract for perhaps not 10,000, but maybe 11,000 or 9,000 in seller credit. So this way we are disconnecting the increase in home price from the seller credit that the seller is giving. So I know that's a little complicated, and sorry, I hope that wasn't too convoluted, but punchline is you can finance closing costs as a buyer, and there is a way for a seller to give a seller credit without having to lose any equity from the sale. So feel free to holler at me if you have a specific scenario, and we can totally talk through that. So let's keep moving really fast. I'll just point out one thing on here that you may not know. Of course, seller credits can go to cover any of these things: home inspection, appraisal fee. They can buy points in order to buy down the interest rate for the buyer, pretty much anything. Again, probably the thing you may not know is that the upfront mortgage insurance or upfront funding fee that come with your FHA and VA/USDA loans, and typically those are rolled into the loan, so it's not a cost that the buyer ever sees. Well, they see it when they sell for sure, and they see it on the statement, but it's not something they have to come out of pocket for. So instead, what we can do is not have the upfront mortgage insurance with an FHA loan rolled into the loan. Instead, we list it as an actual closing cost that's out of pocket for the buyer, and then bam, the seller can pay for that. So clever way to add closing costs if needed, and I'll get into why that would even be the case. But bottom line, sellers can basically pay for any closing cost, and I'll get into what a seller credit can't cover here. But before we get there, let's touch on this real quick. And that gal is super duper excited about this. So, really, it's all in how you're marketing this information. How are you sharing this information with your listing? A book that I really love, can't remember the author's name, Phil Jones, I believe, actually, wrote a book called Exactly What to Say. I do highly recommend the book. There's actually one that's written specifically for realtors, for real estate agents. Again, it's called Exactly What to Say. And the point is that it's not so much what the information you're conveying is, but how you are conveying it. And we all know this. Data proves that an item that is listed for $4 is less likely to sell than an item that's listed at $3.99. So the difference is negligible, but it's just the way that it's presented. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples here. So if you have a buyer that is on the fence and the objection is, interest rates are just really high. I don't want to have a high interest rate. You got to totally understand. Absolutely. I wouldn't want a high interest rate either. Here's what we can do. Right now, sellers are willing to help you get a much lower interest rate. I've even seen rates as low as 5.5%, maybe even 4.5%. And the best part is the seller will pay for it for you. If you could get interest rate in the 5s or maybe even in the 4s, do you think that would motivates you to consider buying right now when it's still a seller's market? Just for example. So really to package this up, instead of saying, let's get, right now we can get 5, 10, 15,000 in seller credits, assign a benefit to the dollar amount. A dollar amount is kind of meaningless when it hits on our brain pan, but hearing something like no closing costs, you don't have any closing costs, that may be more powerful. Or, hey, I know that you want to have maybe a porch on the back. This home doesn't have a porch, but I bet you that we could get the seller to pay to install a porch for us, or give us money up front so that you can install the porch after closing. Or for first-time home buyers, talking about how instead of having to come out of pocket 15 or 20,000 for closing costs and down payment, first of all, let's talk about down payment assistance to cover the down payment, and then instead of having to come out of pocket the additional 5, 10,000 for closing costs, you can keep that money in your pocket so that you can buy furniture, you can buy the new refrigerator, or whatever you need. Again, instead of just describing a benefit that they have, describe why that's actually beneficial. It's like saying that your car has headlights. Instead of saying that, you would say your car has headlights so that you can see when it's dark outside. So hope that analogy is helpful. And again, I do very highly recommend that book, Exactly What to Say. The one for real estate, really the regular book is really good, but the one for real estate agents is really good as well. So super briefly, what can't seller concessions do or cover? So this is super important, super important. So number one, seller credits cannot exceed the amount of closing costs. So this is where you need to be really tight with your loan officer in order to make sure that you're not getting too much seller credit. For example, if we have 15,000 or 10,000, probably more realistic. Let's say we have 10,000 in closing costs. Cool. But you get 15,000 in a seller concession. Well, we can only use 10,000 of it because that's all the closing costs that are available. Now, if your loan officer is really clever, then there are ways that we can add closing costs to the equation so that we could potentially eat up the rest of that seller concession. But super important, you can't have more seller credits than you have closing costs. And this leads to the second point, a really important reason why that's the case. Because let's say cash to close is 20,000 because you got down payment and closing costs. Well, seller credits cannot cover down payment, not at all. No seller concession can go towards down payment. Okay, very important. Little pro tip on VA and USDA. For VA loans, there are non-allowables, which if you don't know what that is, don't even worry about it. You just holler at me and I can talk you through it. But the non-allowables are not included in the 4%. So that is to say, seller can pay for the non-allowables and an additional 4% on top of that. And on USDA, the seller concession limit is not based on the purchase price like all the other loans. Instead, it's actually based on the loan amount, which for USDA loan, typically that's going to be a 0% down situation. So the home price and the loan amount may be the same, but just a little pro tip on there. And one other thing to mention, let's see if I remember. We'll see. Now, one other cap, so you can't have more seller concession than there are closing costs. In addition, there's one other super duper important cap here. You cannot have more seller concession than the loan program that they are doing allows. Okay, so you'll notice right off the bat, for an FHA loan, the max seller concession is 6%, okay, which is really good. That's a lot in closing costs, okay? If you've got a $200,000 loan, that's $12,000 in seller concession. So that's really good. And Now, the other important thing to note here, you'll see VA is 4%, USDA 6%, investment property caps at 2%, very important. But for conventional, if you're doing a primary residence second home, the amount of seller concession they can get is based on their down payment. So if they're doing a minimum down payment of 5%, 3%, then the max seller concession is 3%, which is not tons. So be very, very careful if you've got a conventional home buyer doing a minimum down payment and you're getting seller concessions. We got to talk about it. Matter of fact, there have been scenarios where we have gone FHA because we knew that the seller was going to be willing to give us a lot more in seller concession. And so in order to capture all of that, going FHA is the way to go. So, but if they're doing a 10 for conventional, if they're doing a 10% or more down payment, then 6%. And with a 25% down payment, 9% is what they can get. So, okay, final point. Final point. So with the NAR settlement, the scenario that I just want to clue you into is if the seller is paying for the buyer's agent commission, okay, how does that impact the 6% or 3% limit? Because let's say that you've got a buyer that's doing 3% down payment. Let's say they're doing a 3% down payment and they're getting or just to make the numbers a little no overlap. Let's say they're doing a 5% down payment and they're getting 3% in seller concession. And then let's say that you're paying 3% in buyer's agent commission. Is that 6% in seller credit? And good news, the answer is that because paying buyer's agent commission is common and customary in most markets, certainly in Texas, you can get the buyer's agent commission that the seller is paying does not count as seller concession. So that is to say, you could get 3% seller concession with a minimum down payment for conventional, plus the additional 3% to cover the buyer's agent commission. So buyer's agent commission does not, at least for now, does not count towards the maximum seller concession amount by loan. So hope that's helpful. And ladies and gentlemen, I believe that is it. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. My number 512-468-1207. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And please reach out to me if you have any questions, even if you don't have a buyer that needs to be pre-qualified or they already have a lender. Please, I would love to help. Just share information and expertise so that you can be very informed with your buyers. So thank you so much again for coming, guys. Have a great one.